Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the worst thing you've ever seen or heard someone confess? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was in the hospital and a woman was on the other side of our shared room. She'd overdosed, and I heard her telling the doctor that she hadn't intended to. She just wanted to be too sick for a pimp to make her work that day. I think about that lady often. I hope she's in a better spot these days. Volunteered at a city hospital in high school, mostly quality control surveys and supply stocking. One patient was a Vietnam vet with severe PTSD. Really sad, real tortured soul. Literally yelling, ranting, and raving on and off. I didn't skip him over though. He was there the next 3 weekends, and by the third he was comfortable around me. It turns out, and I forget the rank, as he just called him the new guy in charge, their new commander in Vietnam was a dangerous combo of arrogance and incompetence. He had mentioned him all 3 weekends, but on that third one, he confessed that his unit had very reluctantly agreed he needed to be taken out because he was literally a day away from getting them all killed. This story wasn't told coherently, sorry, and it was 14 years ago, so I'm sure I'm getting all sorts of details wrong, I'm afraid. They drew straws to decide who'd have to do it. He'd drawn the short straw. He went on about how this officer didn't deserve to die and how awful he felt, but how it had to happen. The officer was a dead man anyway. This just stopped everyone else from dying too, and it worked. All but 2 survived the war. Their next officer was more competent. I felt awful for the guy. What a gut-wrenching decision. Everyone involved was under the age of 25 too. Interestingly, a family member I told about this before that revelation, obviously without identifying info, accurately predicted that he had killed him. So I was mentally prepared. This family member predicted it in a very empathetic way, more to mentally prepare me than anything, I think. The patient confessed to me one time that he murdered his wife before coming in. We called the cops to do a wellness check, and she was near death but slightly alive. We managed to save her. I was hanging out at a bike bar I used to frequent when I was in college. Earlier that day, a Muslim woman pushing a stroller had been run down while crossing the road at a crosswalk. It was a hit and run, and the driver wasn't caught. Both the mother and the baby died. While at this bar, a very obviously intoxicated man came in and started loudly boasting that he was the one who ran over this woman and baby. I guess he assumed, since the clientele mostly resembled him, gruff old white men, they wouldn't be violent racists like him. He got 50% of that assumption right. I've never seen the mood of an entire bar change so quickly. The bartender immediately called the cops and turned a blind eye, while the patrons took it upon themselves to make sure he wasn't going anywhere. A group disappeared out back with him in tow, and I didn't see what happened between then and when the squad car finally showed and loaded him up, looking a little worse for wear. My dad told me in 2000 how he burned down the family home in the 80s for insurance. The day after the fire, he found me walking on the railroad tracks and casually mentioned how everyone thought I was in there. His plan was a huge success. He used the money to start his own contracting company and is now a retired multimillionaire. When I asked a guy I was dating why he had pretty much grown up at a boarding school instead of either of his divorced parents, dad was a doctor, mom was a teacher, he told me that when he was 11 years old, he wanted to live with his father, but was told he couldn't. So he plotted and then attempted to murder his mother by whacking her in the head with an axe. She barely survived and was in a coma for 6 months. This happened years ago, but it still lingers in my mind sometimes. Someone, I, female, know from our church, male, who isn't really just an acquaintance or friend, probably in that category, confessed to me that he owns a USB that's just filled with my pictures and is specifically meant to store my pictures. Not to mention, he uses my name for a character in a game he's playing. I didn't know how to feel or react. Take note, we met in a religious community. I was walking through a Walmart parking lot and heard this man screaming at someone over the phone something like, "I was paid less to kill him, fucker. I'll do you next," or something like that. I just got out of that car and went about my day, but that seems pretty bad if true. Without being too specific, I worked as a clinical therapist for refugees while in graduate school. One man was a former military member of a country under siege. He described seeing his buddy for many years get obliterated in front of him by mortar fire. Anyway, while in the US, he was at a store and another non-immigrant customer asked about some of his background and started accusing him of being a terrorist. I remember the hurt and confusion in his voice as he explained to me in session that he was the one fighting those people and wanted nothing more than to go home and live his life. In spite of all this, he was so well adjusted, thoughtful, and kind. He was truly an inspiration of resilience. A couple at a restaurant was idly chatting about how happy they were when the army flew them out of Germany right after they drunkenly ran over a couple crossing a pedestrian walkway. Apparently the victims died, but because they reacted so fast, nothing bad ever happened. I knew someone in the military tell me about how they were ordered to kill a particular person at a particular time because they knew he would be at that place. They were able to plant the explosives and get to a distance to detonate early. They found out that the particular place was a house, and it was a child's birthday party. They followed orders, but the collateral damage was effing horrendous. That's the only time I've seen that person cry. It was eye-opening, and I've decided against going into the military ever since. One of my clients, I'm a tattoo artist, told me that when he was a kid, he was in a gang. He spoke of this time when his buddy shot and killed a guy in front of them, and my client spent the time it took for the cops to arrive washing blood and body matter off of himself in a nearby creek. Dude is in his late 40s now, recently went to rehab, and seems to be really turning his life around, but damn, talk about a traumatic experience. I used to be a correctional officer. The whole shift would go out to bars or restaurant on our days off. One specific female officer was regularly effing an inmate at work, but only a few of us knew about it. Well, she showed up at the bar one night with this guy who looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. They were dancing, making out, whole 9 yards. She introduced him. It was her husband. As a teenager in the early 2000s, I once sat next to a guy in a long Greyhound bus ride who started unburdening himself to me. Evidently, he had been deployed in the Gulf War, and when he came back, he discovered his wife had been cheating on him. He found out where the guy lived and burst in on him and his wife together, armed with a machete and intending just what it sounds like, but decided to back down at the last second. I don't know whether to believe it, but the guy seemed earnest and lucid. An odd guy for sure to be telling his story to a random teenager on a bus, but I had a lot of that kind of thing happen back then. I guess teenage me had one of those faces people wanted to confess their sins to. I don't know, I've seen a lot of stolen valor, especially when it comes to strangers. I'm a veteran. I was just an infantryman in the Marine Corps. But I've had people, start telling stories. Oh, special forces, this and special. Most of us just did a job. We might have got shot at and whatnot, but any of the superhero stories or assassin stories, the people who really did it, they probably wouldn't tell a stranger on a bus. So, you never know. When I was a bagman back in the late 80s, a client told me he drowned his 2-month-old daughter because his wife wasn't giving him any attention. It made it look like an accident. I told the police anonymously through Crime Stoppers that he was arrested and confessed. During his remand, pre-trial, one of the people I worked for had him fall in the shower and snap his neck. Guy was lifer anyway. Payment going forward. If you're wondering why I've got that kind of face, just talk to me. Trigger warning, not safe for work. When I was working at the state hospital where the criminally insane are housed, I had a patient who told me the story about how he murdered his wife. He said after he murdered her, he cut her body up into pieces and made stew out of it like her soup. He said he did it because she was cheating on him. He invited his in-laws over for dinner, and they ate the stew with his wife or their daughter in it. After they got done eating, he said his in-laws were complimenting him on how good it was, and he responded, "Your daughter is delicious," and admitted to them that the full story didn't lie about anything. This was several years ago, and it's by far the scariest and most grotesque thing I've had someone tell me. It still to this day gives me nightmares. I don't like talking about it, but there you have it. The worst thing by far anyone has ever told me. He didn't confess. I just asked him how he ended up here, and he nonchalantly told me it was nothing. which made it even more disturbing and scary. It's got tenor. My buddy from college went on to become a middle school teacher. I think he had just been assigned there and hadn't sought it out. He confessed to me that he had unexpectedly started becoming attracted to some of the girls in his classes. Whoa. I don't remember what I said, whether it was just like, huh, or whether I tried to talk some sense into him. Anyway, it didn't matter. He confessed it to the person who was overseeing his internship there, and he was immediately fired and barred from ever teaching. He was dating one of the teachers from the school, and she didn't break up with him. They got married, in fact, and now have 2 daughters. I worry about that, but it's not like he's hidden his story, or that he ever took it beyond having feelings and confessing them immediately. But that was pretty effed up.